Hello everyone, this is the Insider Threat Podcast, an ISO 3103 1980 compliant show where we explore issues with the human factor and its impact on security and business. I'm your host, Steve Higdon. In this episode, we cover tips for giving in-person user awareness training, some big vulnerabilities found in processors, and more. Don't touch that dial. Welcome back. This is episode 31 of the Insider Threat Podcast for the week of January 15th, 2018. This has been an interesting couple of weeks. I passed along leadership in one organization that I'm a member of while trying to become a better leader in my day job. I've also joined a team of very competent virtual CISOs where we'll serve in that capacity for small or medium-sized businesses who can't afford to have a CISO hired on full-time. I've had a little bit of time for introspection, and maybe it's a new year getting to me, but I've been focused on ways to improve myself this year in many areas. Enough about me, though. It's time for your Infosec Trivia Question, where Google is king and the prize is non-existent. The question last episode was, quite a long time ago, in a distant place, the biggest weapon ever developed was completely destroyed by exploiting a vulnerability intentionally left by an insider threat. What was the name of this weapon, and who was the insider threat? The answers were the Death Star and Galen Erso. For 39 years, there was a bug in the Death Star's design that allowed the Rebel Alliance to take it out relatively easily. It was put there intentionally by our insider threat during its design phase. In our world, you could call this a backdoor and a vulnerability that was readily exploitable. Congratulations to Sean from Providence, Sarah from Germany, Noah from Calgary, and Joe from Decatur for getting the correct answer. Here's your question for this episode. In the book titled Little Brother, the main character is able to bypass government surveillance techniques and pass secure messages. What kind of device did he hack in order to accomplish this task? Send your response to infosecanswer@gmail.com. Be sure to include your first name, location, and the hashtag BART. This week's discussion topic is tips and tricks for giving in-person user awareness training. First, and this is important, this isn't the only type of user awareness training, but some organizations only go this route. Aside from in-person user awareness training, some companies go with the distance learning technique so that they can service a lot of different users all over, no matter where they are. This also helps because it allows the users to get to the training according to their schedule, not necessarily the company's schedule. And that can help a lot when you're worried about losing productivity because everyone has to sit through training. But that's not what we're talking about here. Now, when you're giving in-person user awareness training, this is no different than any other public speaking situation or training of this sort. And it's important for whoever's giving this training to treat it in the same way. The important thing for anything like this is to have retention of the information, and a lot of times that's going to involve keeping the audience engaged. A tip for doing this is to include realistic stories or scenarios, and you can even develop your own case studies to use as examples when you're trying to teach a lesson. But a lot of times, I know when I'm thinking about it, I don't know where to start. What should you include in your in-person user awareness training? Well, you've already got most of that answer right in front of you. Your organization's policies, procedures, maybe some newsletters that you send out about the topic, these are all really good to serve as a base for your training. In fact, if you're doing policy documents correctly, these should be, think of memos or letters to the users that they can use to help formulate their actions so that they understand the rules that come with using computers or computerized assets in the organization. After all, isn't that the information that you want your students to learn from this sort of training? Now, when you're starting your training, it's a good idea, just like with any sort of public speaking, to start with some sort of joke or icebreaker or a question to get the attendees interested and engaged. On a very personal note, I have to give some sort of in-person training to every group of new hires that we have. They go through this sort of new hire orientation class, and it's my job to go in there, tell them how to use the computers, what the rules are. So this is a perfect opportunity for me to tell them how to use their computers securely, as well as, of course, what the reporting procedures are for our organization if they see something that just doesn't look right. Now, last month, I opened the training with a joke that I actually got from Paul Asadorian from the Security Weekly podcast. I said when I was in college, I actually used to build websites for the Russian mob, and this went over very well. In fact, one of my employees actually commented afterwards that that was a really funny joke, but this month I wanted to switch it up a little bit. I spent the whole morning looking for good jokes for this sort of thing online, and I came up with this really long, drawn-out thing, and when it came to the punchline, nobody was even smiling. So I guess the lesson here is, if you find something that works, stick with it. Now, the next point here is to incorporate role-playing to keep the audience engaged and stimulate groupthink. You might give them a scenario and break them into groups and say, hey, look, when you come in the morning, you notice that your computer is doing X. It's doing something strange. Or you're trying to get to an application and you see ransomware instead. Or maybe call it a phishing exercise and they get this email that looks really good, but the URL is just a little bit off. Then, without giving them any information whatsoever, you tell them to get with their groups and try to formulate a response to whatever this situation was. Now, this has several benefits. Not only does it get them thinking and engaged about the topic, but you also get to gauge your audience on the responses that they give. And as each team stands up, maybe they have a representative from each team, stands up and gives what their response would be for their scenario, that's also teaching everyone in the class. Even if they get it wrong, you can point that out and say, hey, look, this would probably be a better idea in this kind of situation. What happens then is you actually have a discussion instead of a lecture, and people are going to learn so much better when they're involved in a discussion. Now, here's a point that's extremely important. You need to go over the reporting procedures and include it in the role play. You tell them what wrong or what abnormalities look like, and then you give them the step-by-step instructions on what they're supposed to do when they notice something like that going on. And what I like to do is I'll ask them over and over again. I'll be talking about whatever, whether or not you're allowed to use a wireless mouse with their computer, and then I'll say, and if you see anything weird, and one or two of them at first will say, call the help desk, because that's our reporting procedures. But by the third or fourth time that I throw that in there, what do you do when you see something strange? They're all answering simultaneously at the same time. And that's when you know that you've actually got it. That's when they understand what the reporting procedures are and what they're supposed to do when they see something strange. And no, in our case anyway, it's not called the Ghostbusters. Actually, that'd be pretty funny to name your help desk the Ghostbusters. But back on topic, and I guess you could call that part of the topic, you need to make them the superheroes of the situation. Puff them up. Tell them that they're a very important part of your security program. They could be, and I just had an argument about this not too long ago, I think it was on Twitter, they could be the first line of defense for your organization. I don't know about you, and I probably mentioned this before, but I don't use all the applications that our users access every single day as a part of their job. I just don't. I don't have time for that. Plus, obviously, we don't have the same role. So who better to understand when something is just not right than the users who actually use these applications all the time? There's nobody. On top of that, who better to notice when one of their employees, one of their coworkers, is staying late after hours for a long time, or they're having financial difficulties, or their car got repossessed. I'm not the manager of every single one of the employees in my organization. I can't be. That would be ridiculous. So how do you expect me to know when they're going through tough times or when they're acting a little bit strangely? Just like the applications before, the only people that are going to be able to notice when something's just not right is the ones who are in the application or sitting next to that other employee every single day. They are the superheroes, and you need to remind them of that. On top of that, and it's actually required in some countries, I would lightly imply the types of technology that are used to monitor employee behavior in systems. Now, you don't have to go in depth and make it a threat or anything like that, but you can let them know that we're watching the kind of traffic that goes on the network, and we're watching user accounts to make sure that they're doing the right thing. You can say things like that in a very conversational way that doesn't get them on the defensive even before they've done anything wrong. But at the same time, if they always have that in the back of their head, that anything that I probably do on this computer is going to be found out, then that could be a huge deterrent towards issues in the future. And finally, end with an open door policy. What I mean by this, and maybe it's just a military thing, or maybe other organizations have it as well, I don't know. But let them know that they won't be punished. Nobody is going to look down on them for reporting something that ends up not being a real thing. I'd rather get 100 reports a day from real users who think they're seeing something suspicious than not get any reports whatsoever when something's obviously suspicious. And you can actually follow up on this. When you do get a report from somebody, and I may have mentioned this in the past as well, but when you get a report, someone emails you saying, hey, I got this weird error message, or hey, I got this pop-up that says I have malware on my computer when I went to this website, and they want me to call this number so that they can fix it for me. The very first thing that I do when I get those, and I do get them, is to thank them. Even if it's ridiculous, even if it's so far-fetched that it's not even believable, and you can tell them, oh no, that was actually just an ad in a website and didn't do anything to your computer. Even if it's that simple, you need to thank them for making the report. Because if you do that, guess what? They're probably going to report again when they see something strange. And that's exactly what we want here. So there you go. There's my tips and tricks for doing in-person user awareness training. And just so you know, it's not much different if you're going to be giving a talk at a conference or any sort of public speaking engagement. A lot of these same tips can be used there. If you're nervous about public speaking, check out Toastmasters International. So what this is, and what I've seen, I haven't actually attended a class, but it's something I've always wanted to do. This is an organization where they have little chapters that they spring up all over the country, several in the city that I live in, and they're free. You go to it, you join the chapter, and what you'll do is every time you meet, you do some sort of public speaking, and then others will do the same, and you kind of give each other tips on how to improve it. Like I said, I've always wanted to do this, and I think everybody, every single person, feels that they need to improve on their public speaking. I don't care if they do it every week. They feel like there's some things that they could probably get better. And this is a good organization for doing that. Another way to get yourself out there is just to do it. Do a small 5-minute class for your coworkers on something that you learned. It doesn't matter. Even if it's just making a nice cup of coffee or something like that. Get yourself out there so that way you get used to it. The jitters kind of go away a little bit after a while. They're not as bad. And you learn how to frame your public speaking in a way that your audience will get the most benefit out of it. Because after all, that's really what it's about. The news over the last couple weeks, and actually over the last month or so, has really been about Meltdown and Spectre. If you haven't heard of these, they're huge vulnerabilities. At first it was just supposed to be in Intel processors, but like every Intel processor and the way that they work, you could essentially leak data. But now they're finding out that other processor vendors are also impacted, namely AMD. But look into these, it's way over my head as far as how the processors work and assembly and the way that they're trying to get faster, apparently, is they predict what your next move is going to be. So they start to load that into memory. Anyway, the Risky Business podcast actually did a really good in-depth, thorough analysis from a technical perspective of these two vulnerabilities. So check out that episode. I'll try to give a link to it in the show notes. But I've also got a link for an article. It's on CISO Online, and it's called Spectre and Meltdown, What You Need to Know Going Forward. And what I try to look for is the ones that aren't trying to sell you a t-shirt. They're not just jumping onto the hype of the vulnerability of the day. They're actually giving the detailed analysis so that they can help you decide whether it's really that much of an impact to you. Our closing thought for this episode comes from Alan Bloom, an American philosopher. He said, "Education is the movement from darkness to light." Thank you for listening to episode 31 of the Insider Threat Podcast. Please remember to subscribe and review in your favorite podcast app, and also share with everyone you know. Those reviews are key to building this out and improving for later episodes, so please feel free to leave suggestions. You can contact me on Twitter @Steve Higdon or send an email to steve@theinsiderthreatpodcast.com. Go to our website, www.theinsiderthreatpodcast.com, to find the show notes for this and every other episode, as well as links to the topics we've covered. You can also go to the website to find a link to the Patreon page and subscribe to the newsletter to get up-to-date information on current episodes and news for the show. Call and leave a voicemail at 443-292-2287 to have a conversation, get a comment added to the show, or even ask a question. Thanks again, and I'll see you folks next time.